Welcome back, and in this video we're going to be covering enhanced for loops, also known as for each loops in Java. And now in the previous videos we went over normal for loops, quite like the one we have here. And so you're probably wondering if there's actually any point to learning about enhanced for loops. Well, they're actually a lot faster to use compared to our normal for loops, especially when we're looking over collections or trying to iterate over collections. And another point is that they tend to be a lot cleaner to use and can even be referred to what's known as syntactic sugar, which is when we write some syntax which is really clean and concise. So let's get straight into it. And as you can see here, I've defined an array list which has the days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And below it, I have a simple for loop which will start off at 0 and go up to the size of days and simply print out each element within days. So if I run this program right now, I should get Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But now let's look at how we would do this using an enhanced for loop. And so what we do is we start off, it's quite similar to the normal for loop in the terms of its structure, where we have our for, and then what we do is we actually define a variable based on the type that we're going to be dealing with. So for example here, we're dealing with strings. So I will define a string, and I'm going to call it day. And then we put a colon in, and the name of the list that we want to iterate over, which is days. And then we simply have a pair of curly braces, and we put in the code that we want to write. So system.out.println. And now I don't do days.getI or days.getDay here, but instead I actually just put in the word day. And that's because this for loop is going to iterate over days, and it's going to go over each element and then store that element first of all within the variable string day. And then I'll be able to do whatever I want with that variable. And then it will iterate over and it will store the next value. So for example, if I run this, we can see, well, I'm actually going to throw in a system.out.println statement there, just so we have a little gap between the two. And so that'll have an end first lot of statements. And here's the second iteration, which involves this for loop. And so it goes over, starts off at Monday, stores that in the variable day, and then we'll print that out. And then it'll go over to the next term in the loop, which is Tuesday, which we can see here. And it will store that in day and print it out. And it'll go over until it gets to the end of the loop. And so that's how it works for an array list. Now let's look at how it works for a set. And so as you can see here, I've actually already defined a set to save us some time, and it's simply called favnums, and I've stored in it all of my favorite numbers. So 17, 38, 42, 1, 2, 3. These are just really random numbers, to be fair. And so to have a enhanced for loop for this set, well, it's actually not too different. So in this case, I'm storing integers, so I'm going to write an int, and then I'm going to call it number. Whatever you call it is completely up to you. And then favnums, so the name of the set. And then what I can do is, well, I can also apply a function to it. So I've defined a function here called square my number, and it'll pretty much take in a number, square it, and then return, well, the square of that number. And so I'm going to go ahead and print that out. So system.out.println, and then square my number, and then I'll put in this, which will represent the number that I'm iterating over. Sorry, the number which is being stored over from the iteration, and then that will get squared and printed out. And so if I were to comment this out, just to make our life easier when we look at the console, and run the program, then we can see I get the square of these numbers all printed out. And so just so you can see that these are actually those numbers in the list, I'm going to run it once without squaring them as well. And as you can see, we get 17, 38, 42, 1, 2, 3, which corresponds to the 17, 38, 42, and 1, 2, 3 here. And so now we're going to look at how to do it with a map, which is just slightly different, as we're also dealing with a key value pair now. So I'm going to uncomment this, And then as you can see, I've made a map which is going to have a list of values from a lie detector test. So it's going to be using a key which will be in the form of an integer, and then the answers are just going to be Boolean answers, so they'll either be true or false. So for example, in question 1, the person answering it got it true, and for question 2 it was false, and so on and so forth. And so let's look at how we would create a for loop for this. It would start off in the exact same way, so for, and then we would actually have to use a method from map. So we'd do map dot entry to represent our entry, and here we sort of just put in the same form that we have in our well, when we created it. So an integer followed by a boolean. Remember to use the wrapper class, and then we simply put in our name, so answers. And then we do lie detector, so the name again of our map, but we also throw in another method which is dot entry set. And so this represents the entry set of all our answers. And then what we can do is access the individual elements as if they were a key value pair. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a counter, so int counter, and I'm going to store that as 0. And we're going to count how many true values there were in our set. So we can see there's 2, so we should get 2. And what I'll say is if, and then answers, well, it's actually just singular, so I'm going to change it to answer because that makes more sense. If the answer dot get value, because it's the value, is true, and so I could say equals equals true. However, this isn't very efficient, and like we were talking about syntactic sugar, we should just say answer dot get value. The reason being is because this whole thing is going to evaluate to a Boolean condition, true or false anyway. So there's no point saying if true is equal to true. And then we say, so if answer.getValue is true, essentially, then we want the counter to increment. So we can say counter plus plus. And if not, then it will just get ignored. And then what we want to do is at the end of our statement, we're just going to print out the value of counter. So I will first of all comment this out so that it doesn't mess up with our console. And then I'm going to run this. And as you can see, we get 2 because the entry is stored in answer for the first one, and then it's evaluated if it's true, and since it is, the counter increases. And that repeats for the rest of them, and if it's false, then it just simply gets ignored. And as a brief side note from the enhanced for loops, we could probably shorten this all into one line using a ternary operator. And so these aren't actually too hard to use. It simply just allows us to put a condition and a increment all in one line. So the way I'll do this is simply by writing counter, because that's what's going to be changing based on the condition, and then plus equal. And so what we do is we put the condition it's based on. So in this case, it's answer dot get key dot get value, but that's how we would get the key. And then question mark. And so what we're saying is if answer.getValue is true, then we add a 1. And if not, then we add a 0. And that's all it is. And so this is actually a really neat piece of code or technique that we can use. And I'll definitely recommend using it wherever you can. So definitely great to keep an eye out for this. And you can see if we run this, then we still get a 2. And so there's our proof that it actually does work as well. And so that's an overview of enhanced for loops in Java. And as you can see, we've had practice using them with each of our collection types that we've gone over in this series. Other than that, that brings us to an end for our Java series in terms of all of our content. And so I really hope you guys have learned a whole load coming up to this point, because I've really definitely enjoyed teaching it. And what I'll try and do to wrap up the series is I'll post a summary video which will basically be a sort of mini project going over an example using all of the techniques, or as many as I can, from the videos and the content that we've covered so far. Aside from that, as per usual, all of the code from this video will be posted in my Git repository, which is linked in the description below. So I hope you've enjoyed the content and found it useful. And if you have, please do like, share and subscribe. And feel free to check out my channel for more Java tutorials.